Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. I am Anchal Vora. In the next 30 years, there would be no Hindus left in Bangladesh. That's what a very well-known economist in Bangladesh has said. We will discuss that in 30 minutes from now. But first, the headlines. Nepal feels a demonetization punch. 75 businesses stay shut on the border. Prachand calls Modi that as Kathmandu decides to terminate the agreement on Kathmandu-Nijgarh Expressway. Says not India, Nepal will build the arterial road. Will lease out the Hambantota port to a Chinese firm, not sell it. Under pressure, Sri Lanka's Prime Minister changes mind, or is it just a clever play of words? Pakistan asks 100 Turkish teachers to leave in 3 days, all to please Turkish President Erdogan, who thinks these schools in Pakistan are pro-Gulen, the preacher who attempted a coup against him. After as less as 30 years, there would be no Hindus in Bangladesh. Shocking revelation made by a well-known Bangladeshi economist. Pope Francis calls abortion a grave sin, but one that can be forgiven. Pope says he extends power to forgive abortions to all priests in the world, but nothing for those who think abortion is their right. What's happening in Nepal? Demonetization in India has had a ripple effect in the neighbourhood. On the India-Nepal border, at least 70 businesses remain shut since Prime Minister Modi demonetized the two bills of 500 and 1,000 rupees. Indian currency is also used in Nepal, and according to Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpakamal Dahal or Prachand, Nepalese hold quite a huge stock of the now invalid notes. Nepal's central bank is called Nepal's Rashtriya Bank, and it is said that 33.6 million Indian rupees are in the Nepali financial system. Prachand had a conversation with the Indian Prime Minister. He called him up and asked the Indian government to make specific arrangements also for these notes that are doing rounds in Nepal to be exchanged. Have a look at this report by my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran.
Indians are not the only ones affected by demonetization of 500 and 1,000 rupee banknotes. Nepal and Bhutan, the only two countries where the Indian rupee is legal tender, are also scrambling to cope with the crisis. Shops and other business establishments in Birganj, Nepalganj and Biratnagar on the open border between Nepal and India have remained closed for the past week and more. Nepalese citizens who live in these towns and nearby areas have been very hard hit. Equally hard hit are Nepal's 6 million citizens who live and work in India. Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpakamal Dahal called up his Indian counterpart and urged him to, quote, make an arrangement so that Nepalese can exchange the banned notes here in Nepal. Some Nepalese media reports quoted Nepal's central bank as saying that 500 and 1,000 Indian banknotes worth nearly $500,000 are in circulation in Nepal's financial system. The Reserve Bank of India, India's central bank, has since formed a task force to address the problems faced by the people of Nepal and Bhutan. Bureau Report, WION.
And we're now joined by a senior journalist from Nepal, a very well-known name here in India, Yuvraj Khamire. Thanks very much, sir, for joining us. Also from the newsroom, Ramesh Ramachandran is going to be joining us for more details on what he's picking from the Indian government here. But let's first go to Mr. Khamire, sir. Always a pleasure to have you. This is the first time you're coming on air on WION, so a big welcome to you there. I'd like to start by asking you, demonetization in India clearly has an impact in Nepal. What's the chatter in the political circles in Nepal as far as this decision of Prime Minister Modi is concerned?
Well, political circle in Nepal was taken aback by this decision. Naturally, this is not something they would be knowing, because after all, it was the Prime Minister of India who was going to take the decision. But then it has had an impact in Nepal's economy. A large section of the people who already said Indian currency is freely acceptable and convertible in Nepal. In some areas like far west Nepal, I think Indian currency is in greater circulation than the Nepali circulation. People, go across the border to work there. So there are all sections of the society they are directly affected by this in Nepal. And the border town you mentioned, and please add Bhairava also. So because there is a large volume of trade with the Indian side, and in some cases they pay by cash, it has been badly hit during the past few days. And also a large section of the Indian nationals working in Nepal who don't have any bank account and all that, they are also affected by this. So difficult to say who is not affected.
Right, so Nepal clearly also bearing the brunt. Let me go to my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran now. Ramesh, Prachand has called Prime Minister Modi. He's asked Indian government to figure out a way. The National Reserve Bank says that 33.6 million Indian rupees are in Nepal, in the Nepalese financial system. Anything you're picking up as far as the Nepalese concerns from the Indian government? Any plan in place? Is the Indian government thinking of putting a plan in place?
Achal, the Reserve Bank of India, which is India's central bank, has since decided to set up a task force at the request of the governments of Nepal and Bhutan. And now, as we mentioned in our reports, both Nepal and Bhutan, in their countries, the Indian rupee is freely convertible, and it's a second currency almost for both these countries. So the Reserve Bank of India here has decided to set up a task force which will look into the concerns of the Nepalese and the Bhutanese government. But that said, the pressure was actually more from the Nepal Rashtra Bank, which is Nepal's central bank, according to which almost 3,000 plus crore rupees, which is almost $500,000 US of Indian currency in 500 and 1,000 banknotes, are in circulation in Nepal's financial system. So the pressure was telling, which is why we saw Nepalese Prime Minister Prachanda call up Prime Minister Modi and seek his intervention.
Let me go back to Yuvraj Kumira. Yuvraj, give us a sense of what sort of pressure is Nepal really under? What does it mean for people not just on the border, but for a common Nepali as well within in the hilly areas of Nepal, because Indian currency is also valid in Nepal and is quite in use.
Yeah, it is. But in the hill areas in Kathmandu, Indian currency may not be that freely like in circulation in the market. But I told you earlier, almost every section is hit by this. Say, for instance, about 100,000 Gorkha pensioners from the Indian Army, they live in Pokhara. I think part of their salary and pension is also paid in Indian currency. So they have this. There is a huge number of people suffering from, like cancer who are having to go to Indian hospitals for regular treatment. They have this kind of cash because they never know when to go there, and when they need it, they may not be getting it from the bank. So they have, in their personal possession all this. And there are students, large number of students, there are large number of patients going to Indian hospitals. They all are affected in almost every part of the country, but mostly, along the border towns.
Right. Let me go to Ramesh Ramachandran for a word on Nepal's decision to not have the very crucial highway built by India and sort of calling off that agreement. Ramesh, do you find the timing interesting of it all, or would you say the two are not linked? Nonetheless, the decision taken by Nepal to not have India build that highway crucial?
Not at all. One should not reach too much into the coincidence of these two disparate decisions, actually, or situations. This has been sort of in the works for quite some time now. So it should not come as a surprise at all to either the Nepalese government or to the Indian government at that matter.
Yuvraj, final word. Would you say that the politicians in Nepal think that Indian government perhaps should have dropped in a word of caution before going ahead with the demonetization plan?
No, I don't think demonetization is not something that could be, shared with another government. But nevertheless, I think, I think Indian government is sensitive to this issue. Nepali currency is pegged with the Indian currency, and they'll take a, a proper decision, keeping the human side also at the center of this.
Yuvraj Himire, thanks very much, sir, for joining us. And Ramesh, thank you for bringing us those details. Moving on to India's other neighbour, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka owes China $8 billion for work done on infrastructure projects, including Hambantota Port and other projects. It's not able to repay, and the word was that Sri Lanka had handed over these projects to China. These projects began in the time of former President Rajapakse, but even the current Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has come under immense pressure over the high interest rates imposed, by the Chinese. Sri Lanka's finance minister recently had told news agency Reuters that Sri Lanka would sell 80% of the Hambantota port to a Chinese firm. This led to further questioning of Sri Lanka's government. Now, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka has clarified. Wickremesinghe said it's not selling, but leasing the port. Before we go to our guest to discuss this, let's have a look at some additional information on how these ports are working out for Sri Lanka. That information on your television screens. Is Lanka in the dragon's debt trap? A huge percent of revenues going towards debt repayment. A third of all earnings are going to China. Debt burden led to $1.5 billion IMF bailout for Sri Lanka. All right, so that's the information coming up on your television screens. Rajapakse's dream, has that led Sri Lanka to this debt trap? Hambantota Port is a $105 billion deep-sea port. It's been built with Chinese loans, and the Chinese have asked for very heavy interest. Lanka is paying $147 million debt each year, and it is quite struggling in doing that. But what is the port bringing Sri Lanka? In 2011, just 6 ships pulled into the port. Just 6 ships. In 2013, the number did increase, but still not enough. Under 100 ships pulled into the port. We're now joined by former Sri Lankan diplomat. We've got Bernard with us. Bernard Gunatileke. Hi, sir. This is Anchal Vora. I do hope I pronounced your name correctly, and if I haven't, please accept my apologies. I'd like to ask you, a lot of concern there is in Sri Lanka. Some of the people that we spoke to, they think that the Prime Minister's just sort of used the word lease instead of the word sell, because he hasn't specified the time frame for the lease that he's here talking about regarding the Hambantota port. Would you say this is just a clever play of words, because there is that concern in Sri Lanka?
Well, I don't say it is a clever play of words. If the Prime Minister says the Hambantota port was leased, we have to believe him, because this is a democratic country. He is responsible for his actions to the parliament and to the people, and he will not be able to sell something and say that I have leased. So far as we are concerned, if he says he has leased, I don't think the leasing has taken place as yet. If he says that he is leasing, we have to accept that it is a lease. And having been in the government system for nearly 40 years, I have come across of situations where the government lease lands for 30 years, lease government other estates, tea estates and other properties for 40 years, and even sometimes they lease government land for 99 years. So I'm not in a position to tell exactly the duration of this particular lease, but leasing land by the government to private individuals, businessmen, are quite common in Sri Lanka.
Right, sir. But the concern is that the Prime Minister hasn't specified how many years is he leasing this land for. Would you say he should have at least announced that much to ensure that there is no confusion then?
I presume when the deal is done or the deal is finalized, there will be a session that would take place in the parliament where questions will be asked and he will have to answer. So he should be in a position to tell exactly what the conditions of this particular lease is.
And sir, would you also say that when it comes to Ranil Wickremesinghe, he is sort of seen a bit less compromising when it comes to Sri Lanka and China's relationship, and gives in a little less if you compare him to Rajapakse's government, because he did change the Colombo port agreement as well, brought in the 99-year lease, and now even on Hambantota he's saying, if we're not selling it, we're just leasing it out?
Well, we have reasons to believe that he has done what the country should done, or what a leader should have done, taking into consideration the needs of the country as well as its commitments to the international community, to its neighbours, or to the neighbourhood.
And so what's the public perception of these announcements that are coming out from Sri Lanka's government, when the Prime Minister says he's not selling it, he's going to lease it out as far as Chinese loan is concerned? What's the perception on the ground?
We have to understand the circumstances under which the current administration came into power. These are not loans that was taken by the current administration, and they have, the current administration has to carry the burden of the undertakings that were attended to by the previous administration. So the people understand that they are, the country is in a difficult situation. The leaders of the country are in a difficult situation, and they expect the Prime Minister and the government to do the right thing by the country and by the people.
What would be the impact of this, at least how the Chinese look at it, a bit of a flip-flop by the Sri Lankan government? They, of course, are dealing with Sri Lanka and sort of not one government or the other. What do you think, what sort of an impact would this have on the Sri Lanka's relationship with the Chinese?
Well, Sri Lanka's relationship with the Chinese is a long-standing one. There may be bumps on the road once in a way. I think both sides are quite aware of such things could happen. And when such things happen, then of course what has happened in the past and what has happened this time also, that there are discussions, there are negotiations, and they come to some amicable solution. We have to understand the fact that Hambantota is one of the least developed districts in the country. And what Rajapaksa administration did was to uplift that particular area, particular region from the current position it was in. And they engaged in this particular extravagant, if I may use the word extravagant, projects without realizing, without understanding the financial consequences of those projects.
Thank you very much for joining us, sir. It's quite clear, if you look at the figures, that so far these projects aren't working out wonders for the people of Sri Lanka. We certainly wish that does happen. Sri Lankan government at the moment, though, under pressure over contracts, over deals that were struck during the time of the previous dispensation. Okay, we're going to move on now. 100 Turkish school teachers, along with their families, have been asked to leave Pakistan in less than 3 days. They are teaching over 11,000 students in 28 schools, which employ more than 1,000 Pakistanis. Why? It is Pakistan's discount to Turkish President Erdogan. These schools are seen to be pro-Fethullah Gulen, a preacher based in the United States that Erdogan blames for the attempted coup against him in July. Erdogan's government has removed more than 100,000 civil servants on the suspicion that they are linked to Gulen. In an even more shocking development, Turkey's government wants to bring in a legislation that frees pedophiles and rapists. It proposes a bill that would let off men who assault underage girls if they marry their victims. Now, these are the shocking developments that are coming in. Let's get you more from our Pakistan Bureau Chief, Taha Siddiqui. Taha is now joining us on Skype. Taha, I'd like to start by asking you, even though Pakistan's government seems to be giving this, making this concession for its relationship with Erdogan, there are people who've stood up against this decision. What more can you tell us?
Well, we've seen that leading up to this whole expulsion of these teachers and the staff, around about 400 people their visas they were told earlier in the week, last week, that their visas would expire by Sunday, which was yesterday, and they had to leave within 72 hours. And most of them, from our reports, from what we know, have left. The school right now is still running because they have local management also, but the senior management and many of the Turkish teachers, they have had to leave in a very abrupt manner, and because of which there were protests across these schools, across the cities, because they have a network of schools in many of the different cities, and some of the students did come out on the roads. Also, there was a lot of criticism that the government did get because of the fact that the Turkish government had asked for this to happen around about 3 to 4 months ago, but there was no alternative given by the Turkish government. And just when the Turkey's president was visiting, they announced this to happen, and it was sort of a move to please him, and because of which a lot of people were saying that these are not relations which are state to state, rather. And given the fact that there is an education emergency in the country, Pakistan already has a sort of the education sector in a dismal and does not really perform well. And then these schools have been providing education to Pakistanis for the last 20 years. So all of this, keeping in context, there has been a lot of criticism that the government has received after this decision.
Right. So in that sense, so there is resistance to what Pakistan's government wants to do in order to appease Erdogan. But give us a sense of Pakistan's relationship with Turkey at this juncture. I like to tell you, Taha, that just a week or two ago, we had a very senior minister from the government of Turkey visit India and talking about how India needs to be a major player in Turkey, which is reeling with economic concerns at a time that ISIS is knocking on their door as well.
Well, the Pakistani government has had a very strong relationship with Turkey. Not just right now. In recent times, it has actually sort of increased the cooperation between both sides. The PMLN, Nawaz Sharif government, and Shehbaz Sharif, who's his younger brother, and Chief Minister of Punjab, there are lots of investment opportunities and avenues that have been given to the Turkish investors to come into Pakistan. We saw even when the president came, there was a roundtable business conference where investors were asked from Turkey to come and invest into Pakistan. Even if you go previously, General Musharraf, who was Pakistan's dictator for 9 years, he spoke fluent Turkish. He spent most of his childhood in Turkey, so they have had those close relations. And now, given the fact that recently the Turkish president survived a military coup, and there has been a sort of a civil-military sort of power struggle over there, and which Pakistan kind of shares that kind of political history with the country too. So in that way, there are lots of common grounds between Turkey and Pakistan. Another thing a lot of people talk about is that from a Muslim country's point of view around the world, Pakistan and Turkey are two non-Arab Muslim-speaking countries, and which are leading powers in the Muslim world, and because of which also again they kind of take a leading role and collaborate with each other a lot on a lot of issues.
What about this story that we've been reporting on, and actually has been reported in many parts of the world, that Turkish government wants to bring in a bill that essentially says that if you rape an underage girl and then you decide to marry that child, then you will be a free person. I mean, it's shocking and quite repulsive there, even for them to think so. Any noises you hear as far as the Pakistani establishment or the media or the people are concerned, as far as these events, and also the fact that 100,000 people have been sort of thrown from their jobs or arrested because Erdogan suspected that they may be supporting Gulen. On both counts, what's the perception in Pakistan?
Well, in Pakistan, most of the public, the media here hasn't really discussed this. I mean, to look at it, that particular law, there have been sort of similar laws in Pakistan, or similar discussions about laws that could be passed when it comes to sort of the Sharia law, or, for example, the Sharia courts, or even the Council of Islamic Ideology has said similar sort of things in the past when it comes to, for example, women's rights, or for example, when it comes to laws about rape, or one of the famous examples of that is that in Pakistan, the Council of Islamic Ideology said that DNA evidence could not be admissible in court because DNA evidence was not. There's no Islamic precedence for it. So in similar ways, Pakistan society, and now there's been a lot of actually somebody recently also wrote this piece in which they said that Turkey is going for a sort of a Pakistanization of its country because of the way we are seeing the developments that are happening. Pakistan has already gone through that Islamization process ever since the last 20, 30 years.
Right.
Now people keep referring and comparing that to Turkey, of what now is happening in Turkey is somewhat similar to what has already happened in Pakistan.
Taha, thanks very much for joining us with those details. So it's not just a relationship between the two governments, but also many similarities there between some of the horrific legislations. Let's take a break. When we come back, we talk about Bangladesh and how in the next 30 years, according to a very well-known Bangladeshi economist, there would be no Hindus in Bangladesh. We'll try and understand why. Stay with us.